Flash might be a hero, but he definitely isn't flawless. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. There have been many different heroes who have taken up the mantle of Flash over the years, and all of them have had their darker and more questionable moments when it comes to their heroic career. Today we revisit some of those moments as we count down the top 10 times the Flash was a villain. Let's get counting. Number 10. Abandon his daughter. Sort of. In the CW Arrowverse, Flash basically put his daughter in a tough spot where she wasn't allowed to return to 2019 and had to stay in the future, where she came from, the year 2049. Because she had betrayed Barry and Team Flash, he told her to never return to the year 2019 and warned her that if she did so, he would know, as he would sense her presence in the Speed Force. Wanting to see her father Barry Allen again, Nora decided she had no choice but to find another way to travel back undetected. This caused Nora West Allen to ask Thawne about how to use the negative Speed Force, something Barry couldn't sense. As a result, Nora would later decide to confront the consequences of her actions, dying in the process, instead of continuously being on the run for the rest of her life, because she had used the negative Speed Force so much. Unknowingly, the Flash here helped Nora to turn into a villain by rejecting her. Then there was the whole weird thing of how they ran into like an alternate Nora later on, and she was like, oh yeah, you guys used to tell me stories about this other version of me that you ran into that died, which is like kinda weird. It's kind of a weird story. Number 9. Killing Eobard Thawne. This is sort of a weird one, as although everyone seemed to feel that Barry Allen here was a villain, he was also just attempting to defend himself from a future that had come true before and almost completely broken him. Barry Allen killed Eobard Thawne after Thawne made an appearance on his wedding day. Barry wasn't marrying Iris here. In fact, Iris was no longer around because before Thawne had actually killed her. Instead, he was marrying his current love, Fiona Webb, whom Thawne, when he showed up on their wedding day, attempted to kill. Fearing that Thawne would once again kill his romantic partner and still traumatized from when he'd likely killed Iris, Barry Allen killed Thawne before he could harm Fiona. However, because Thawne was killed by Barry, Barry ended up on trial, with even his nephew Wally West testifying against him, claiming that Barry had used basically an unwarranted amount of speed and force to stop Thawne. Speed Force, you might say. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more cool Flash lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Mass mind manipulation. Affecting what people know and don't know on a mass scale definitely feels like villain territory, and this is exactly what Wally ended up doing after having one of the worst days of his life. We know it was one of the worst because his now gone Uncle Barry, also known as the Flash, came back just for it, and Barry had said that he would only reappear on the 3 worst days of Wally West's life, so this was definitely one of them. It was after Wally and Linda had lost their unborn children in a fight against Zoom. Believing it would be better for himself and Linda, and maybe even the whole world if no one knew of his secret identity as the Flash, Barry, along with his pal, the Spectre, who had also stopped by for a visit, decided to grant Wally's wish, and everyone was made to forget the truth of the Flash's identity. However, what Wally did not think to ask about, or maybe stipulate, was how this would affect him, as he himself, it turns out, also forgot. Which, not so great. This not only caused a lot more crime to come about, but also made things worse between him and Linda. Note to self, don't mess with the whole world's memories of me. Number 7. Trapping Zoom in his worst memory. And that previous point wasn't even the worst part of that story. Although making the whole world forget that Wally West was the Flash created a lot of problems, even worse, in my opinion, was what he did to Zoom in revenge for hurting Linda. The two had an epic fight while Linda was taken to the hospital, which spanned issues 199 and issue 200 of the series, that started way back in 1987. Volume 2, if you will. But even more shocking was the aftermath of that fight. Wally of course won the fight thanks to a speed boost from both Bart Allen and Jay Garrick, and to make sure Zoom couldn't strike back thereafter again, he trapped him in one of the worst moments of his life, which played on a loop. The time he had unwittingly sealed the fate of his father-in-law, causing his death and later causing him to lose the love of his life, Ashley. I feel like being stuck in the worst moment of your life forever, that's a pretty bad punishment, I'm just saying. I mean, I don't think it ended up actually being forever because comics, but that's pretty bad. Number 6. Punishing Inertia. After Wally West learned of Bart Allen's death, he considered punishing Inertia for it by killing him, but then he ultimately decided on a worse punishment for the villain. A worse punishment than death. Wow. A punishment that sounds like something thought up by a supervillain, truth be told. Granted, Wally was hurting at the time, but at the end of the day, he's still a hero, and this punishment ultimately sounds like something that was cooked up by a great speed-based supervillain. Wally used his powers to slow Inertia down to the point that he became became virtually a living statue, unable to move but still able to hear and see in real time, experiencing the world around but living in ultra slow motion physically. Each blink of his eyes supposedly would take 100 years. Wally then placed this living statue version of the villain in the Flash Museum, facing an actual statue of Bart Allen, forcing Inertia to gaze endlessly at the ghost of a man he could never be. Sounds like a horror story. It sounds awful. Number 5. Flashpoint. Unintentionally, Barry Allen ended up as the villain of his own story and the villain of basically the entire universe when he selfishly used his powers to travel back in time to save his mother. Doing this completely altered the timeline and the future for many heroes and characters in the world. After learning of just how much of an issue this had caused and how he was solely responsible for the reshaping of the world, from villain Eobard Thawne no less, what a way to find out, Barry Allen realized that in order to fix everything, he'd have to dip back into the time stream and stop his past self from going back in time to save his mother. Even then, it's implied that Flashpoint was the main cause for the multiverse being permanently altered, and Barry Allen himself became one of the people responsible for the existence of the new continuity and reboot known as Prime Earth and the New 52. Number 4. Became the new Black Flash. The Black Flash is a version of Death in the comics, a very specific version of Death. The Black Flash is said to be the version of Death who comes for speedsters when it is their time to pass on. Often, the Black Flash has been seen as a villain in the comics, even though really when you think about it, Death is kind of just a part of life and is a concept, so it's not really inherently evil when you think about it that way. Still, from the perspective of those who are being chased down, the Black Flash is a villain, which is why it was so crazy when after the Black Flash died, there was a time when Barry Allen had to take over, becoming the new Black Flash temporarily. Number 3. Heroes in Crisis. One of the worst times where we saw the Flash become a villain took place during Heroes in Crisis, which ultimately was a pretty interesting and suspenseful murder mystery story that also dealt with the consequences of being a hero from a mental health standpoint. So overall, this was a cool story, but it was also kind of awful in what it did to Wally. Something that most fans weren't too hot on was the big reveal of this story. A mass murder happened at the Sanctuary, killing many of the heroes who came there to take refuge and seek therapeutic help for trauma suffered both on duty as a hero and outside of that life. Initially, we were led to believe that either Booster Gold or Harley Quinn was possibly responsible, but later on it was revealed that an out-of-control Wally West was actually to blame. We had just gotten Wally back at this point, so many fans were disappointed to see him so quickly and intensely vilified, especially considering even though Wally was really to blame, it wasn't entirely his fault. He lost control of the Speed Force as a result of confronting his own trauma and his paranoia regarding the judgment surrounding said trauma while at Sanctuary. He was assuming that Sanctuary was made by the other heroes purely out of pity for him, because Wally was kind of crazy at the time after having the new reboot come about. Wally decided to break into the files and find out for himself if his suspicions were true. Then he learned that he was in fact wrong and basically became overwhelmed by the countless sessions with other heroes where they discussed their own intense and personal traumas, causing him to lose control. So of course, none of the killings had really been intentional. So it was a really tragic story. Number 2. Becomes Famine. During the events of DC's Future State, we learned exactly what the future holds for Wally. And yeah, it's not good. While we might be enjoying the Flash series now, where Wally is back and most certainly not a villain, it turns out that his destiny is once again to become one of DC's most powerful and tragic supervillains. This time though, it really seems as though it was not poor Wally's fault. Is it ever his fault? I mean, his punishment of other villains is his fault, but this is so unfortunate. In Future State, Wally ends up becoming possessed by the evil entity known as Famine, becoming one of what appear to be the apocalyptic Four Horsemen. Number 1. Attack on the Teen Titans Academy. One of the atrocities that Wally committed as one of the Four Riders as Famine was that he killed a ton of faculty and students over at the Teen Titans Academy. We see this all go down in a flashback in Future State after the mysterious student Red X seemingly unleashes them on the world. Near the beginning of the first issue for Future State Teen Titans, and in a few panels in that second issue, we get to see just how many people died in this attack on the Academy, and the death toll seems to be pretty substantial. Among the fallen are fellow Titan Donna Troy and youngster Wallace West. That's right, Wally as Famine killed his own family member. It's Flashes killing other baby Flashes, you know what I mean? What do you think are some of the worst things the Flash has ever done? What are some stories where you question the hero's heroic merits? Let us know in the comments below. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight, reminding you to stay nerdy, YouTube.